All right, welcome back in Live Now. I'm Austin Westfall. A live look at Gaza, the time in Gaza, Israel Standard Time, 5:45 in the morning. We, of course, we're just tracking lots and lots of United Nations General Assembly related headlines with Hal, speaking about Russia, immigration, international diplomacy. One thing we didn't talk about is the Israel-Hamas War. That's because we have Dr. Alon Burstein standing by to discuss everything that is the latest on the conflict and some of the news that's been coming out of the UN General Assembly, specifically the idea of a number of major Western powers recognizing Palestine as a state. Basically, what they've done is they've drawn ire from Israel in the process. The AP says that Prime Minister Netanyahu has threatened to take unilateral action in response, possibly including the annexation of parts of the West Bank. All of this alone as the Gaza war approaches its 2-year mark in October. So the countries that we're talking about, I'll just bring up 5 of them. France, Britain, Canada, Australia, and Portugal have all formally recognized a Palestinian state despite opposition from the United States and Israel. My question for you to lead this off is, why is the U.S. opposing this? There's a number of other Western countries that are choosing to recognize a Palestinian state. What do those 5 countries see that the U.S. doesn't? As we see a live blast in Gaza, by the way.
It's good to see you, Austin. First of all, it's important to also put this in context. Over the last 40 years, give or take, many different states have recognized the state of Palestine. Essentially, the wave started in 1988 when Yasser Arafat, then the chairman of the Palestine Liberation Organization, he declared that he's going to form a Palestinian state. And since then, more and more countries have been recognizing the state of Palestine. So it's not just these 5 that we're talking about. In grand total, up until today, 157 out of the 193 states in the United Nations have recognized the Palestinian state. Again, to put that in context, that's 81% of the states in the world have recognized the state of Palestine. So this is part of a global trend that has been building over time. The significance of what happened now in the last several days is the fact that this is now the more quote-unquote Western states that are now leading this charge. As you said, France, United Kingdom, Portugal, Australia, but there's also others within Europe that were part of this wave. Malta, Monaco, and lots of other countries are now part of the recognition of Palestine. And that is where we're seeing a shift, as opposed to in the past, where it was mostly what was considered the third world or Arab states or things like that. So that's in terms of why this is significant now. But to answer your question of why the United States is opposed to this, there's several different tacks that you can take. Historically, as part of the treaties between Israel and Palestinians, Israel and the Palestine Liberation Organization, it was stated that no side is supposed to take unilateral steps to change the status quo. So what the United States has said, and Israel is obviously the one that is asking the United States to do this, is that every time the state of Palestine, which has a seat in the United Nations, it's a non-state observer, it has basically almost all the rights now except for the right to vote in the UN, every time they make another move towards trying to get other states to recognize their statehood, the United States says this is unto itself a violation of past treaties between Israel and the Palestinians. Those treaties from the Oslo Accords from the 90s say that the sides should only come to final status agreement through negotiations. So that was what the United States said when they said that they were not going to allow the PLO chairman of the Palestinian Authority, or Palestinian president, depends who you ask, Mahmoud Abbas. The United States did not allow him to come to the United Nations to speak in this General Assembly, did not give him a visa, he had to speak on video. That was framed as punishment for the fact that these are unilateral steps that the state of Palestine is leading, and they're not supposed to do that. So that's the official legal reason why the United States is saying they're against this. Behind this, obviously, is diplomacy. The United States sees itself as a staunch ally of Israel. Specifically, Donald Trump has also positioned himself very often as trying to promote what he sees as Israel's interests in the Middle East. And Israel, especially under the current leadership of Netanyahu, is fervently against the Palestinian state. So this is seen also within that context. And the last thing I'll say very briefly, it's also within the general world politics of diplomacy between Trump and the EU. On the one hand, all NATO members. On the other hand, a lot of animosity and rivalry, tariffs, and etc. The fact that France specifically was the one that led the charge against what the United States wanted cannot be disconnected from that larger global context that's going on.
Let's show some video while we're talking about it. This is Mahmoud Abbas speaking via video call yesterday at the UN. So let's talk about Netanyahu, Alon. Bibi has made it clear that he doesn't want a two-state solution. So what kind of solution has he proposed?
So Israel historically has taken several different tracks. Sometimes it has been more assuming that this will be resolved, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, through local governance of the Palestinians that will not be citizens of Israel, but somehow they will accept they'll accept a state of being residents of Israel, but not actually having citizenship. That is one track that Israel was talking about in the 60s and 70s and 80s to some extent. Then in the 90s, Israel started to talk about a two-state solution. We had the Oslo Accords, and that was leading towards a division of Israel and the Palestinian territories between the state of Israel and the state of Palestine. Since then, since the collapse of the Oslo Accords in the year 2000, the outbreak of the Second Intifada, since then, there's been no meaningful negotiation between Israel and a Palestinian leadership, and specifically since Netanyahu's return to power in 2009, which has been in power all years since then, except for one, from 2009, he has himself not promoted a solution or a resolution to the conflict. He has taken much more of a tact of managing the conflict, trying to basically keep a status quo. Settlements in the West Bank are growing on the one hand. On the other hand, not annexing and not poking the bear, if the bear is the international community or Palestinians. That has been his tact basically until 2023. And that's what was seen with October 7th blowing up in Netanyahu's face. The idea that you could bribe Hamas by allowing Qatar to fund Hamas and also meanwhile keep the West Bank at bay, that blew up on October 7th. Right now, Israel's not really proposing, therefore, the final status solution between Israel and Palestinians will be. Israel's not talking about that. What Israel's made very clear under Netanyahu's leadership is, number one, it objects to the existence of a Palestinian state. Netanyahu, in response to these recognitions, put out a whole video saying that there will never be a Palestinian state. It's only going to be one state from the river to the sea, from west of the Jordan River. So that's one thing that he said, there will not be a Palestinian state. He has talked about a civil administration in the Gaza Strip. So he's talked about the fact that there will be some sort of self-governance in the Gaza Strip, but he has said it will not be led by Hamas or the Palestinian Authority. So right now we're still seeing, even though Netanyahu is not saying that, we're still seeing an approach of managing the conflict rather than proposing long-term solutions. That said, and this relates to what you were saying about Israel's possible retaliations with annexation, other figures in Netanyahu's government, Bezalel Smotrich, Itamar Ben-Gvir, they have their own ideas on what should be the solutions to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and they are far more hawkish than anything Netanyahu has said.
So we've been looking at this live vantage point of Gaza, also have this live look of Jerusalem as well. You bring up France, Alon. I'll just give people some context about what's been happening at the UN General Assembly. The AP says that France and Saudi Arabia are using the General Assembly to inject new urgency into the quest for a two-state solution to the larger Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Alon, I got to ask you a question that I asked our guests yesterday. Is a two-state solution the solution for the larger Israeli-Palestinian conflict? Is that usually the common train of thought?
So it's an interesting question because it's really evolved over time. Like I said, originally in the partition of Palestine that was voted on in the United Nations, there was supposed to be two states. It was supposed to be an Israeli state and an Arab state. And this was accepted by the Israeli leadership. It was largely rejected by the Arab leadership. Palestinian leadership didn't really exist at that time. So even though a lot of history say Palestinians rejected it, there was no real Palestinian leadership then, but the larger Arab leadership rejected it. Then there were Israeli-Arab wars, and there were a lot of different thoughts of what should be the case. Since the international community, and specifically the United States, got more and more involved in trying to resolve the conflict leading into the 80s and 90s, that became the paradigm. The paradigm became there needs to be two states here. You cannot have a viable one state that's Israel, where Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza Strip do not have citizenship. At the same time, you cannot also realistically maintain a Jewish state of Israel if 5 million Palestinians in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip are given citizenship. So the sort of paradigm that was embraced by the international community was a two-state solution. Again, that kind of blew up in everyone's faces already in the year 2000 when the negotiations collapsed. And since then, people were talking about aspiring for a two-state solution. No one really has made any moves to put it into practice. There's this increasing international recognition. Other than that, we haven't really seen any moves towards that. That said, and again, as we're watching this, we're seeing blasts in the Gaza Strip indicating more that right now the sides are not working towards negotiating with each other. But I will just say, that said, the fact that right now we appear to be one of the farthest places we are from a two-state solution, I have often told people over the last 2 years, that should not tell us that that idea is dead. I'm not saying if it's good or bad, I'm saying factually. That should not tell us that idea is dead. And the reason is, in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, whenever there have been major upheavals that happened, if you look 2 to 3 years before that, they seemed completely unrealistic. In 1993, we had a famous handshake between Yasser Arafat, then who was recognized as international terrorist, and Israel's Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin on the White House lawn, Bill Clinton pushing them together and they're shaking hands. 2 years before that, Israel was trying to assassinate Yasser Arafat. Arafat was allied with Saddam Hussein during the first Gulf War. It did not seem possible within 2 years that's going to happen. Similarly, in 2002-3, we're at the height of the Second Intifada. Buses are blowing up in Israel. Israel just reinvaded the West Bank. Within 2 years, Israel pulled out of the Gaza Strip unilaterally, led by Ariel Sharon, who was then Israel's most hawkish figure. So it does seem right now that a two-state solution is completely non-realistic. That said, in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, whenever there's major upheavals of violence, they usually end with a complete shift in the way people are thinking. What is that shift going to be? Is it going to be a two-state solution, some sort of annexation within Israel will carry in the West Bank? That I don't know. But I will say, I think that we are very unlikely that this war will end with us going back to the way things were on October 6th, 2023, before this broke out. In the Israel-Palestinian conflict, things change radically. Will it be two states? Will it be one state? You know, Libya's former leader Gaddafi suggested a confederacy called Israel-Palestine. Maybe. I don't know what it will be, but it is very unlikely that we'll go back to the way things were. If you want to expand the map for a second, I'll just talk a little bit about what Israel's referring to with this idea of possible annexation. So what do we have in Israel? Again, we usually focus on the Gaza Strip. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the West Bank. In the West Bank, Israel has never annexed this territory. It is held officially under Israeli occupation. It is divided between some areas of Israeli jurisdiction, some areas of Palestinian Authority jurisdiction. Israel's only annexed East Jerusalem. What Israel is talking about when it comes to the possible retaliations are annexing parts of the West Bank, saying they are no longer considered by Israel as a separate entity, and the Israeli law is now going to apply to them, and they are officially part of Israel. What that will mean, that has a lot of technical and legal aspects of what that will mean. But the different ideas that are being thrown around are, on the one hand, the most hawkish ideas. Those are the ones of Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir, and they are saying Israel needs to annex the entire West Bank, basically make this line here disappear, and this entire area become Israel. And as far as they're concerned, the world can keep on screaming, but that's what should happen. Then we have what Netanyahu is advocating as what's considered a more moderate approach, which is to annex the Jordan Valley. The Jordan Valley is this area over here along the border between Israel and Jordan. And Netanyahu has said, I can sell this. I can sell this possibly to the United Arab Emirates. I can sell this to the United States. I'm not going to annex the entire West Bank, but I can say that's a security need, that Israel is going to always hold on to that border, and just annexing that. So that's what's being thrown around in Israel, as in terms of saying the Palestinians have made a unilateral move. Israel's going to make a unilateral move. Not sure what will happen. That's just important also. But in context, because we're going to be seeing Israel saying they're going to do something, whether they do or they don't, we're going to see them say that they're going to do something probably in the coming days already.
I'm always so thankful for the addition of the maps behind you. It helps put all this stuff into perspective. One more thing we got to hit. While we're talking about the UN, let's discuss something that happened about a week ago. A team of independent experts commissioned by the United Nations Human Rights Council has concluded that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. They issued a report on Tuesday that calls on the international community to end the genocide and act to punish those responsible for it. Before we analyze this alone, everyone needs to know the definition of genocide. What is it?
So this is one of the places where there's, obviously a lot of controversy, but even a lot of problems when it comes to the debate. When people think genocide, they tend to think the Holocaust. They tend to think Rwanda. They tend to think are examples of an attempt to completely wipe out and annihilate a population. And they think, and we can see that by the sheer numbers. Now, that maybe should be the right definition, morally, not morally. That's a question for everyone to debate. But legally, in international law, that is not the definition. International law actually does not say anything about how many people have to have been killed. What international law says, and this is based on the Rome statutes as the definitions of the International Criminal Court going back to 2002, it says, and I'm actually just going to read it out, I have it in front of me. According to the Rome statute, genocide is committed when one or more of the following 5 categories of underlying acts is committed with the intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. And the 5 categories include killing members of the group, causing serious bodily injury, deliberately inflicting conditions that make it impossible for the group to live, imposing measures that are intended to prevent births, and forcibly transferring children from the group to another group. So legally, what international legal scholars are debating are whether Israel has done that in the Gaza Strip. Then that theoretically, again, according to the report, according to the definitions, has nothing to do with the amount of people killed. And I just bring that up because very often the debate is, what are you talking about? Even if you accept the numbers of the Palestinian Health Ministry, which, as I've said, people probably should, but even if you accept them, that's 65,000 people killed. How could that be genocide when we don't talk about genocide in Syria, in Ukraine? We're talking there are hundreds of thousands of people killed. The reason why there's often a debate is because when people think genocide, they think numbers, but the international definition is not about numbers. It's about the intent to destroy in whole or in part members of a group. And then it lists specific categories. That's just in terms of the definition where there's often confusion.
So, and then, the logical next question there is, how do people work out where to stand, and how do they work out how to parse out where they should fall on this spectrum alone? If there's an international definition, and then people, as you say, need to debate it amongst themselves, how are we to decide whether what's happening in Gaza does meet the definition of genocide? Is the answer simply it's within the eye of the beholder, something else?
So I'll say 2 things. I'll say how this commission looked at it, and then maybe how people should think about it. In terms of how this commission looked at it, they looked for these 5 things: the intent to destroy large members or in whole or in part the Palestinian nationhood. And the operative word there is intent. And that is another thing that people often forget, that the distinction largely between genocide and crimes against humanity is that you can commit mass acts of atrocities and murder, and that, for example, the leaders of Hamas were summoned to the ICC and an arrest warrant was given on crimes against humanity for mass murder on October 7th. But what the definition of genocide is that legally you have to say that the state had the intent to actually do this. It's the intent to do this, not the outcome. And one of the things that the commission did is simply look at the rhetoric that was used by the Israeli government, by the Israeli prime minister, by the military commanders. Rhetoric saying you should nuke Gaza. Ministers and cabinets saying we should kill all the men in Gaza. Israeli prime minister saying we're not going to allow any food into Gaza. All these things that often were seen as just populist statements that may or may not have actually been implemented into policy. But then the commission says, okay, if we see that there is starvation in Gaza, then we have statements of the state leaders saying we are going to starve them out. Okay, now we have our proof, so to speak, that this was the intent of the country and that the country implemented it. So in terms of the fact that this commission found that Israel is guilty of that, it looked at the evidence on the ground, but it also looked at the intent that was, again, repeatedly stated. And I spoke to you about this dozens of times. We were saying the rhetoric that was being used by Israel. I said whether they intend or don't intend to implement this, it is going to end up being evidence against them. And that is, in fact, what happened. Another thing that's also important to note, Israel refused to cooperate with this commission. It said it's not submitting its own evidence. The commission relied only on Palestinian evidence that was submitted. It didn't, and it says that in the report, it did not have any defense submitted by Israel. Israel said it's not cooperating. So that's in terms of, if we are to understand this commission and the fact that it found Israel guilty, that's how it was looking at it. In terms of how people should debate this, and this is, again, often comes up in my classroom, I often get asked, I say a couple of things. First of all, make sure that you know what you're talking about with whoever you're talking to, because very often people are, one person is coming and talking from the moral stance. Is Israel committing genocide? Do Israelis want to kill all Palestinians? And someone else is coming from the legal stance. Do you meet this requirement legally to say that you have or you haven't? And very often that's where people do not understand each other. So the first thing to think about when you're trying to understand, is this genocide or not, is what are both sides talking about? Who are you coming? What are you and your partner you're talking to? What is your definition and what is it that you're debating? That's point number one. Point number two is also important to remember. All of us really care about issues in the world. Most of us really don't know actually all the evidence and what is actually happening. Most of us are going based on our gut instincts. The definitions of genocide are a legal definition, and especially to an audience in the United States, we know very well how litigious systems work. Someone could be guilty as hell, but they get let off on a technicality because the legal definition said A, B, and C, or even more regrettably, someone could be innocent, but they end up being found guilty because of circumstantial evidence. And that's also important to remember. When we say is it guilt or innocence, the definitions are legal. They're not about, is this right or wrong? Is it moral or is it not moral? And that is also something that's important to remember, because people often feel very impassioned, as though if you say that it's genocide, then that means that you are an anti-Semite or hate Israel. And if you don't say that it's genocide, that means you don't care about the Palestinians and you don't care what's happening in Gaza. The truth is, the commission and the way the United Nations looks at this is a legal question. Does it meet these standards? And if so, what has to be done? So that's something that I would just encourage people, as much as we all feel impassioned about this, remember, as far as the UN is concerned, it's a legal question. And when you are trying to debate this, make sure that you are clear if you and your partner are talking in the same way. Is it a moral question or a legal question?
Alon is the host of the Israel-Palestine Report on YouTube. You can go give him a subscribe. Look up either his name or the Israel-Palestine Report. You can go give him a subscribe. Alon, always appreciate the insight. Take care. Have a good rest of your night.
Thank you. Have a good night.
All right. So what we're going to do is, and you know, we did see some live blasts indicative of the idea that the IDF continues its campaign at this hour. The time right now, just past 6 in the morning, Israel Standard Time. Time for us to hit a break. Back in a moment.